Alright, hello. So I'm going to show you how to solder up the Notduino kit in the ChipWhisperer-Lite. So here I split out all the various parts of the kit that should be part of it. So you have the Notduino PCB. There's a bunch of headers. So there's the one shrouded header here, as well as a number of separate pin headers. You can see the various pin headers. There's a red and green LED. There's two electrolytic capacitors here. There's 3 different values of resistors, so you should go based on the color code of the resistor, so that'll be posted separately, but you'll notice there's different number of resistors. So there's extra. You need 4 51 ohm resistors, I believe, so you get 5, so you get 1 extra of each. You need 1 10K, you get 2. You need 2 330 ohms, so you get 3 of those. There's also these 100 nanofarad capacitors, again with an extra, little push button switches, and then the IC socket, and just an ATmega 328, so the same chip that's in the Arduino. We also have some pin header jumpers and the SMA connector. So those are all the parts that will be in your kit. So again, I've sort of split it out here, so they're all nicely labeled, and I'll show you the process of assembling it now. So I'll put the camera mounted in. And basically the assembly process is similar for any type of project like this that you might have otherwise done. Basically, it's easiest to mount this lower components first and then work upward from there. So I'll mount the resistors first. So we have 330 ohms, and the value is right on the PCB as well to make it easier for you. So you can just put the 330 ohms here. Oops. The other guy in here. And I'll put the 10K. So it goes in between there. So this is like the cooking show where everything's set up nicely for you. You'll probably just have it all in your baggie there. And then we'll have 51, 51, 51, and 51 ohms. So the 4 51 ohm resistors. And again, you do get the 1 extra just in case you drop one or something like that. You don't have to be quite as worried. So just bend them over and drop them in the board. 1, 2, 3, and 4. Where did I say that was? Alright, so I'll solder those guys down. So for soldering, you can use the immersion gold board. Lets you use lead or lead-free solder. So put on safety glasses. These are nice DeWalt ones I found that are really good. They never fog up, it seems, so you can wear them without issue. Let's do this. So I'm using good old leaded solder here in North America. We can easily find. If you're in Europe or other places, that might be a trickier thing to get, but we do not care about the environment here, so they make it easy for us to buy that. Just go through everything. Alright, there we go. And just use your handy wire snips. I have another pair of snips here. They have you can get snips that have a little catch so that the leads won't go flying off. It's going to be useful. Anyway, you can use a few of those leads as well. There's a spot to put in jumpers for scope probe leads, so you can use them to make the test points if you end up wanting test points as well. There you go. So, resistor is done. And you can just build up, what's the next part? Maybe I'll put some switches in. And these, they only go one way, you'll see, so they just snap in. And what else could we put in? Maybe I will put the IC socket in. So the IC socket, of course, has a little notch, which you might as well line up. It looks a little nicer with the notch on the board. Okay, let's do that. There we go. So the switches are nice, they stand on their own. There we go. It's probably the least exciting video possible based on just watching someone solder. We can zoom in a little here, get a better view. And then the 4 switches each. Where's the other switch going to? There. Alright, great. So maybe what I'll put in next is... Alright, so we're doing this in 2 cuts because my memory card got full and I didn't notice. Anyway, so what I'm going to do is do the headers. So the headers, as a quick note, the only one, the 6-pin header, you make sure you put in the middle. There's a separate header here that's the ISP for the ABR. So if you need to do in-system programming, which you shouldn't need to do, that's the reason you have that separate header over there. So I'll do the headers. So there's 2, there's a 4, oops, and the 4 I just dropped here. What you'll see is that it has a slight offset probably on the leads. Which way does it go? So it sort of should have a nice tight fit in there, depending on which way you put it. I think either way, there we go. So I'll put it facing horizontally like that, but it's still nice and tight in there. So some of these, I believe it's the SparkFun footprints, they have this nice wiggle on the pins, and what it means is when you put these headers in, they stay, they have a bit of a friction fit, just a very light friction fit, so that you can flip the board over easily. The only one that doesn't is this this guy here. So let's go ahead and hold him in, and the rest of them will stay in. And we can flip the board and do a quick solder job. So we'll do the 4-pin header. We'll do the 6-pin header. And I'll do the, so there's this 7-pin 1x7 header. Solder that guy. And again, you can see the bit of the wiggle there. Helps to hold it in. And the 5-pin guy fell out. So 5-pin header in the corner here. There we go. So this 5-pin header is just the serial. If you want to use a external serial device, you don't actually need any of these headers, well, these 1-pin headers when you're using it, but you might as well mount them. So the female header, or male shrouded header, sorry, not female, looks like this, and the only thing to notice is there's a little 1 indicator as well as this notch here. It's really critical you line that up on the silk screen so basically the notch, line up with the notch, and that's the easiest way. So it should look like that. If you put it backwards, it won't work, and it's extremely hard to unsolder. Unsolder it from your board, so you will not be super happy if you were to accidentally do that. There we go, so just go through and solder this guy on. So we're getting there. The next thing I might do is, actually I forgot these capacitors I meant to do earlier. So there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 capacitors. Oh no, not C8 and C9, sorry. Just C1, 2, 3, 4. So the 4 capacitors, again, you get the 1 extra. So make sure you don't, as I almost just said too, C8 and C9 are if you wanted to use an external crystal, which by default you don't need. There's no need to. The ChipWhisperer-Lite is able to generate a suitable clock for the device if you want to use an external clock, so it's just easier to use it to do that generation. So we'll go ahead and drop these in. So again, I'm just going to put them through their location here. Just like that, and I think that's all of them. And there's actually, so if you mount all of them, you don't get, I think C3, these are connected in parallel, so technically one's optional if you really need it, but there's a C1 over here is the AVCC for the AVR, so it can be mounted like that. So let's just bend these guys backwards and then solder them up. Okay. There you go. So you get your little splayed leads like that. Do the regular thing. Alright, and once again I'll go along and clip all of the excess leads off. Alright, easy. So next I'm going to mount these electrolytic capacitors, so take a note of the negative side here, so you can see this big minus 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 symbol, and that goes in the side of the electrolytic capacitor that's marked negative in the board. So the two negatives actually face each other towards the middle, so you can see there's the negative, and then this guy here, I'm going to take the negative and insert it like this. Come on. So the two negatives face each other, just push it down. I don't need to, all these leads are sticking to me here. There we go. So the last thing, we'll have to mount the LEDs and the SMA. And this will all be soldered up. And drop the AVR in the socket and put the jumpers on. So, put this down. And if you want to use the same color scheme I did, I had the power LED as red and the user one as green. So if you're used to LEDs, you know there's the one side that's the cathode that has a flat lead, and so you basically just make sure you match up that flat side with the flat side on the silk screen there. So you can see I've matched the flat side, and same thing for this guy. And same deal, we'll just go ahead and flip that over. Then soldering this up here. Just make sure they're not sticking out at weird angles. Maybe a bit, okay. Alright, so finally, again, make sure the flat side is matching. So the final thing, the SMA connectors, you actually only need to mount one. So if you look on the board, you can see these are just connected. The middle part, they both connect. So it gives you two in case you want one to... you can use one for glitching or one for measurement or anything. I give you two connectors, but it's totally up to you if you want to mount just one or both. I'll mount both in this little demo video here, but you might want to save one because they're pretty handy, you know, if you want to have your own target later. Don't feel needed to mount both. And the trick with these is I would solder the center conductor first. So I'll put a bit of solder right on the center guy. And this locks them in place a bit. Get them somewhat even. When you go to solder the outer shield, be aware that it could take, depending on your soldering iron, it might take a lot of time or heat to really get a good flow here. I have this nice Metcal iron that will do this very quickly, but with the big solder, big thermal mass, if you just have a smaller iron, it can take a little bit of time. So just as a warning, so you're not too frustrated. And I'll flip it over and do the back side as well. Oops. Alright, so that is the component soldering. As I mentioned, you can, if you want, there's a few spots to, that was hot still, there's a few spots to add test lead clips. So there's this ground marking up here, and I just make a lead into a loop like this, and I'm just going to pop it through and sort of give myself a reasonable lead length like that maybe. And I'm actually going to solder this from the top a bit. So what this is used for is if you want to clip on a scope probe, that gives you a much bigger lead to grasp. Little test points can sometimes be hard to grasp with just a, you know, if you have the ground clip of the scope, now you have a nice big spot that you can clip that on. And you also have a ground here, so if you have a logic analyzer that you have a little lead to put on, it gives you some options. And the additional option here is these pads here. You can make tests. You can either get test points, or the easier thing to do is to make little loops once again, and you can solder these loops in here. And so that's if you want to use a scope to look at any of these signals in addition to the ChipWhisperer-Lite. But you don't need to do that necessarily. As well, the size of those holes is designed such that You can actually use the probe directly in them. So if I have a regular scope probe, if I take the tip off, you'll notice some of them are larger and will nicely fit in there. You have to be careful doing this because it's possible to, if you leave all of the pressure of the probe on this, it can bend the tip. So I'd recommend instead doing the little loops of wire, but it's up to you. So it's up to however you want to debug. And when you make the loop of wire, then you can nicely get scope probes in there. So the final thing to do is I'm going to insert the AVR. So if you know if you've used IC sockets before, you'll know the leads are always a tiny bit too wide. So all we do is if they don't fit, you can double check because sometimes someone might have there's a tool you can get that straightens them that we have. So some of them are sometimes straightened. And I'll just gently bend it back and sort of make sure that the leads are going in the socket and not on the outside of it. There we go. And these two jumpers, you'll notice on the underside of the board it has the default jumper position, which is what you sort of would expect to be set to. There, and then the other default is right here. So I set that default jumper. There you go. So that is the complete Notduino assembly, and you can see some of the other documentation for how you actually use this thing. So to use it, you will have to break apart the ChipWhisperer-Lite and add the breaker pack onto it because it requires that external plug.